Bronner said the military drills won't be the same as in previous years. Meantime, Bronner expressed his support for the enhanced defense cooperation agreement between the Philippines and the United States. He also agrees with forging visiting forces agreements with other countries.
This is not the stand of the Philippine Army, but my personal stand. I believe this would be beneficial for our country if we allow more of our partners and our ally to come into the country to train with us.
Given the VFA, the Balikatan, the expanded EDCA, how should we expect China to? I know you said let's not play the victim card here,
Yeah.
and I understand that. But at the same time, just to be realistic, what should we watch out for?
We will see more yung bullying, yung more laser, baka sunod
Harassing of fishermen.
no? Susunod baka may drones na tayo makita, no? Kasi ini-experiment nila yung technology nila.
The Philippine Army has been in the spotlight these days. First, it is preparing for what could be the biggest Balikatan exercises between Filipino and American troops. Then there's the murder case and looming court-martial proceedings against former Presidential Security Group Chief Jesus Durante III. We talk about all of these things and more tonight on the Chiefs. Good evening, ako po si Robbie Alampay. Kasama po natin online from Manila, Ami Pamintuan, Editor-in-Chief po ng Philippine Star. In Quezon City, kasama natin si Lucy Cruz Valdez, Head of News 5. At mamaya po sasamahan tayo dito sa Mandaluyong ni Ed Lingao. Chiefs, good evening. Happy Monday.
Magandang gabi.
Happy Monday.
Anong balita, Ami? As in, anong headline natin bukas?
Hindi naman headline, pero di ba sabi ni President Marcos, hindi priority sa kanya yung chat-cha, pero pinasa na rin kanina ng House Committee para mag-constitute ng Constitutional Convention. So,
Siguro, no?
eh, siyempre matutuwa niya si Senator Robin Hood Padilla. Hindi
Di
siya
ba
mag-resign.
Di ba just about a week ago, sinabi niya hindi niya priority nga ang charter change, di ba? So parang, pero ngayon, yung House na pinasa yung kon-kon, tapos gusto pa nila, it's not just small revisions, di ba? Gusto nila yung buo. Medyo,
para kaya pa nagkaroon ng mga committee on constitutional changes and constitutional reform kung hindi sila pwede mungkahi ng gano'n.
Public consultation pa.
Pero yun nga, going back to what you said, Ami, di ba? It was President Marcos himself who said na hindi ko priority. I think we even asked that of one legislator last week, I forget who. But we asked that, parang kung yung presidente mismo ayaw, ibig sabihin ba nun patay na? But then the answer was, obviously, hindi, may sariling agenda pa rin yung mga, may iniisip pa rin, that agenda, pero may iniisip pa rin yung mga legislators natin.
Oo. Kaya sabi mo nga, kailangan may silbi yung committee, no? Constitutional amendment.
In the meantime, meron ding mga Ami, I presume you're also covering these itong mga local government officials na inaatake, di ba? I mean, there's been ambush north and south.
Dumadami, no? Although hindi pa naman election-related, mukhang tinitingnan nila yung campaign daw sa drugs.
Yeah.
Yung in case of the governor, Mamintalanjong, ha?
Right. Pero yung sa Apari Vice Mayor, wala pang motive, no? Oo, yun, hindi pa malinaw.
Kanina nga sa big story, ang kausap namin si Professor Julkip Liwadi ng UP Islamic Studies. And he was saying nga, parang this is also a question that they're asking because lalong-lalo na sa BARM, people are asking them about RIDO and so on. Pero sabi niya, pero usually RIDO, pagka magulo yung environment. Ngayon, you're looking forward to BARM, malayo-layo pang elections, kakatapos lang ng election. So, but he said, if we're going to look at that, then we have to also look at what's happening in the power structures in Mindanao. Baka raw merong, with the MILF going mainstream, baka merong shifting in in the political and the creating political vacuums, or at the very least political imbalances.
Wala daw Rido dyan sa case ni Agyong Wala
hindi.
daw Rido involved.
Although may ridong nagaganap sa ground level,
Yes.
para nag-aaway-away mga pamilya, sunod-sunod yung mga, di ba, yung random shooting na hindi malaman ng pulis, ano pa ito? Ba't pumapatay ng sino-sino? And they're now speculating that it's probably Rido.
And speculating is right. I mean, to that point, right now, we are all still just asking questions, even the experts we've been consulting, and obviously that's going to be something that we'll be looking at in other episodes of the Chiefs. But for now, we'll be talking about our security sector, our defense sector, Balikatan, and also we have a lot of questions also about about itong military trial that's going to take place, court martial. Right? It's an opportunity also to learn about that. We'll talk to our first guest after this short break. The Chiefs will be right back. Defense ties between the Philippines and the United States are getting stronger by the day. One proves the biggest Balikatan exercises, which will happen this year. Let's discuss that with Lieutenant General Romeo Bronner, Commanding General of the Philippine Army, and also later on in the program, Army Provost Marshal Colonel Randy Remonte. Later, we'll be talking about court-martial proceedings against General Jesus Durante III. Good evening, gentlemen, General and Colonel. Welcome to the Chiefs.
Good evening.
Good evening, sirs.
Yes, good evening, ma'am. Good evening, sir.
General,
Good evening, ma'am.
I want to clarify to our audience, sabay po si General at si Colonel natin kausapin. We'll start with you, General. Gaya nga po ng sabi natin, this is going to be the biggest Balikatan exercises. Pero yung the biggest, meron ding konteksto doon, we would presume. Why now? I mean, and in the context of everything that's happening in the West Philippine Sea, everything that we're looking at in Taiwan, and for that matter, this rebalancing of the foreign policy of President Marcos, how do you put everything in context for this, the biggest Balikatan exercises?
Well, last year, we already had, we claimed that last year's Balikatan exercise was the biggest so far. But from the planning exercises that we did with our counterpart, the U.S. Armed Forces, we are now bringing in more components into the training exercise. Marami na pong mga capabilities na bago that we have to develop jointly. And so we are including this in the exercises for this year. Aside from that, we are saying that it's the biggest so far because the United States is bringing in more troops compared to the previous years.
General, okay, in the past, no, the focus of Balikatan exercises was humanitarian assistance and disaster response. And of course, there were military exercises as well. The question now is whether, as some congressmen have suggested, whether this will be expanded to include objectives like, deterring aggression in the West Philippine Sea. So the question is also whether it will expand to include maritime defenses.
Actually, ma'am, we already did that in our previous exercises. You're right when you said that the previous focus was on humanitarian assistance and disaster response (HADR). There were also a few components for war fighting and, of course, counterterrorism. But this year, we are including some aspects also on maritime defense and territorial defense as well.
So hindi na lang internal.
Hindi na lang internal, ma'am. Yes, that's correct.
So we're getting ready
pero-
for external aggression. And
Yes, but
yes, go ahead.
Yes, but this is not the first time that we're doing that. In fact, in the previous exercises, we already did that. For instance, the beach landing that was exercised by the U.S. Marines and the Philippine Marines jointly was already part of that maritime operations.
So when you say, yeah, go ahead, Ami.
So General, saan mga lugar yung identified for the war games? Puro ba to sa western seaboard natin?
Ma'am, actually, it's really all over the country. Meron po tayong mga exercises that will be done in the traditional exercise areas such as Fort Magsaysay, dun po sa Capas, Tarlac, and we have done exercises already in Palawan. So pati po sa Mindanao, we will also have some component exercises there. Kasi po yung when we talk about Balikatan exercise, it involves almost all components of the military, including the non-combat components of the military. And one of the big aspects of the Balikatan exercise would be a command post exercise. Ibig po sabihin nito, these are the commanders and the staff doing an exercise within a confined premises.
May possibility ba na mag-operate kayo sa Pag-asa Island?
Well, right now, ma'am, hindi po included ito.
So kung Palawan, saang area? Saang area kaya yun?
Ma'am, right now, I cannot really divulge the areas where our Balikatan exercises will be held. But aside from the Balikatan exercise, we are also going to have the Salaknib exercise. Ito pong Salaknib exercise is an exercise between the Army of the United States in the Pacific and the Philippine Army.
General,
sorry, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I want to bring in also Colonel Remonte. Colonel, if you don't mind, I mean, other than asking, for the geographic locations, maybe zoom out a bit also and tell us, ano ba yung mga, the General mentioned combat as well as non-combat activities that could take place and that will take place here under the Balikatan and the military exercise in general. Pero ano po ba ang parameters ng mga activities na mangyayari dito?
Colonel,
Colonel?
I think it's addressed to you. Colonel Remonte.
Nakaano yan?
Nakamute. Ayan.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Colonel Remonte?
Sir, actually, I am here to discuss about
Yes.
Sige pa.
the
Mars. Yes.
Sige, we'll get to that. We'll get to that later on. So in the meantime, balik tayo kay General Bronner. General, other than the locations, I mean, set the stage for us in terms of the scope of the activities. You mentioned the combat activities as well as non-combat activities.
Yes. Aside from the field training exercises that will be conducted, these are the combat exercises. We will also have non-combat exercises such as subject matter expert exchanges. Ito po yung mga parang classroom setting po ito where we have an expert talking about a particular subject matter. For instance, cybersecurity. These are aspects that we are now trying to develop. These are capabilities that we are trying to develop. Cybersecurity. Of course, we don't have any capability when it comes to space, in the space domain. But of course, it's good for us to know already what's happening there. And we will have some experts talking about this.
Okay.
Kasi nga po, nakita natin the importance of images, for instance, from satellites in space.
Kakaroon ba kayo ng component on electronic warfare? Surveillance, surveillance tracking, weaponry. Kasi yan yung bago ngayon, ano? And which was already, well, sinasabi nila it was a civilian use, no? Pero yung laser is part of electronic warfare, eh. Although, yun na nga sinasabi nung kabila, hindi naman daw military grade yung ginamit nila. Pero will that be part of the war games? Will the joint exercises, the electronic component?
Yes, ma'am, definitely. Electronic warfare will also be part of the exercises. In other words, ito pong yung gagawin nating exercise will not just be confined to purely combat. In fact, a big part of it, as I said, would still be the humanitarian assistance and disaster response. So may mga projects pa rin po tayo that will be done in the communities, particularly in the areas where we will have the exercises.
But General,
How is this different from general? Kasi di ba yung Japan din and Korea, they also conduct military exercises with the US. How is that different? I ask because in the case of Korea, napoprovoke talaga yung North Korea, no? Doon sa mga military exercise nila. So I'm just wondering whether, well, of course, I'm sure China will be provoked by this, but, well, I know that the Philippines will always claim that this has been going on anyway for a long time now. But this time, you yourself have said nga, that this is expanded and that this will now focus more on territorial defense, which, I mean, obviously does not escape the notice of China. So how do you defend this and how do you differentiate this from the exercises with Japan and Korea?
Well, actually, this year's exercise, ma'am, I'm talking about the Salaknib exercise, the army-to-army exercise. This is the 8th iteration. And for the Balikatan exercise, it will be the 38th iteration. So matagal na natin ginagawa ito. And wala naman talagang provocation na nangyayari because in our planning, we are very careful. We consider that, ma'am. We also consider the effects on our neighbors, even our ASEAN neighbors. So we are really very careful when we select, for instance, the scenario that we are going to exercise. But as I said, this isn't focused only on combat. For instance, we also have a logistics exercise. Yung pong mga logisticians natin will exercise how they can bring supplies to the front lines, to our troops. Our commanders and their staff will exercise how they will do their functions, their respective functions, in accordance to the scenario that will be happening. Now, compared to the exercises that Japan and the US and Korea are having, I'm not really privy to the exercises that they're doing, ma'am, but I believe they are very similar to the exercises that we're having here because of the regional security situation. Halos pare-pareho yung nararamdaman natin or na-experience natin ng mga threats dito sa region. So I believe it would be almost similar.
As part of being careful, do you coordinate with other countries or do you at least notify them lalo na yung mga, well, within the region. Isama na natin, tatanungin ko na directly. Do you inform China?
Definitely, China is not informed about the specifics.
Yes.
But it is public knowledge, ma'am. We, in fact, during the press conference that we had at the Philippine Army, it was held to kick off the month-long anniversary of the Philippine Army because we're going to celebrate on the 22nd of March. Yun po yung nabanggit natin na mga activities natin. So it's really not a secret that we hold this Balikatan exercises, but we also have an observer program which is injected into the Balikatan exercise, where we allow our partners to observe the exercises. So ito po yung mga partner nations natin like Japan, Korea, Australia, our ASEAN neighbors. They're invited to come. They may send an observer group so that they can see how we conduct our exercises.
Marami na kayo naging balikatan. Has it ever happened na na-challenge kayo ng China?
Wala pa akong alam, ma'am. I haven't come across any information na na-challenge tayo ng China on the specifics of the Balikatan exercise.
Doon sa operation mismo? Kasi baka mamaya habang nag-exercises kayo sa West Philippine Sea, may magsisinag na naman sa inyo ng laser. Paano?
Actually, ma'am, naka-focus kasi dito, naka-focus inland yung ating mga exercises. Yung mga live firing natin are done in Fort Magsaysay or in Kapas Tarlac. So wala naman talagang effect ito from to the neighboring countries.
General, what about the expanded EDCA? Do we have any news on the additional bases and where they are located?
Ma'am, I cannot talk about that. Actually, at my level, I cannot talk about it because it's really sa level po ng General Headquarters and even the Department of National Defense, specifically on the topic of EDCA. But what I can say at my level sa Philippine Army is that one of the sites, and this is not a secret, one of the sites is in Fort Magsaysay because this is the traditional training site of the Philippine Army. So talagang meron po tayong area dyan where we are dedicating it to the enhanced defense cooperation agreement between the Philippines and the United States.
General,
I'm
kanina
sure
kanina pa tayong, if you noticed, we keep looping these scenes of trucks and yung mga, di ba, mga land vehicles. And notwithstanding what you keep reminding na hindi lang to all combat, meron din mga non-combat, may mga relief operations, so on. That's the image we have. No? We see, ang image ng mga tao is ground war, traditional war, medyo may air war components, maybe sea, but it's all these military hardware. But you also mentioned nga, may kasama dito ang cybersecurity, kasama ang electronic, maybe even space components. Siguro po ito yung tanong, when it comes to external threats, even here in the context of the Philippines, what will the modern warfare look like? Ano bang pinaghahandaan natin? Kasi baka naman lahat ng imahe natin itong traditional warfare, but in all reality, when you paint the scenario, what does modern warfare, what might modern warfare look like in the context of the Philippines?
Well, we have a glimpse of the future warfare in what is happening now in Russia and Ukraine. So yun po ang magiging itsura ng modern warfare anywhere in the world, because in fact, wars will eventually be fought inland. No? Meron po tayong, of course, gera outside the territory, the territorial waters, for instance, but it will not last kasi it will be fought between airplanes, between jets, and between ships. But eventually, in order for an invasion, for instance, to be successful, they will have to come into the land.
Boots
They
on
will
the
have to
ground then, no?
invade.
Yes.
Yes, just like what's happening now in Ukraine. Russia came in, but the only difference is that there is no body of water separating those two countries. Sa atin meron, no? In case nga may dumating sa atin because we are an archipelago. So you add that aspect, yung maritime, but eventually dito po sa land, no? Wars will be fought inland.
Pero using electronic weaponry, no? Ano bang capability natin, General? Meron na ba tayong, can we say we have credible defense capability sa electronic aspect of warfare?
We are still trying to develop that capability, ma'am. But we already have the basic or the rudimentary capability of electronic warfare. In fact, when it comes to our cyber warriors, so to speak, yung mga sundalo natin that deal with cybersecurity, we can say that we have one of the best soldiers, no, in this field. Kasi nga po, if you recall, when viruses were not yet popular in the world, no, a long time ago, ang mga unang gumagawa ng mga viruses were Filipinos. Yung, di ba po?
Yung love, ano yan, the love, the love
Yes.
virus.
Alam ba?
Yes, oo. So hindi po tayo nagkukulang sa mga talents
Programmers,
natin, no?
yes.
Magagaling programmers natin. So when it comes to cybersecurity, we are developing, while we are still developing that capability, meron na po tayo nun. And that includes also electronic warfare. But when it comes to electronic warfare, a big factor that we should consider are the platforms. Ito po yung mga equipment. No?
Yes.
Because without the proper equipment, hindi po maganda yung ating electronic warfare, both defense and offense.
Okay. General Bronner and Colonel Remonte, we just need to take a break. We will continue our discussion, and later on we'll bring in Colonel Remonte to talk about the court-martial process after this break. Keep it here on One News.
Philippine Army has filed charges in relation to the murder of businesswoman and model Yvonne Chua Plaza. Brigadier General Jesus Durante III and Colonel Michael Licyayo were named as respondents.
The pre-trial investigation is still ongoing, and we already gave a copy of the charges to both Generals Durante and Colonel Licyayo, and they have given their counter affidavits already. So our Provo Marshal and our Judge Advocate in the Philippine Army are studying now the affidavits of these two respondents.
Durante has been tagged as the mastermind behind the murder, with Licyayo as his deputy commander.
Welcome back to Chiefs on One News. We still have with us Army Chief Lieutenant General Romeo Browner and Army Provo Marshal Colonel Randy Remonte. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for staying with us. My name is Ed Lingao. Let me start off, sir, with Colonel Remonte naman. Colonel Randy Remonte, of course, is a Provo Marshal, and the Provo Marshal is charged with preserving good order and discipline in the armed forces, as well as taking charge of those who are confined for any offense within the AFP. Sir, let me start off, sir, with you. I understand yung sinampa laban dun sa dalawa are violations of two articles of war, conduct unbecoming of an officer and a gentleman, and conduct prejudicial to good order and military discipline. Sir, let me ask you this lang from the point of view of a civilian. Siyempre naman, most Filipinos are civilians, and I suppose the big question on a lot of people's minds, civilians, is given the gravity of the charges being ranged against these people in the civilian courts, bakit po ganun lang yung court-martial charges, conduct unbecoming of an officer and conduct prejudicial to good order? Para namang may pagka-generic, kumbaga, yung charges po.
Yes, sir. Good evening. Sir, first of all, I would like to state that as of February 14, my office, the Office of the Army Provo Marshal, has already completed its investigation report and has submitted it to the Office of the Army Judge Advocate, where it is now undergoing legal review. Upon the completion of said legal review, it will be forwarded through official channels to the Commanding General of the Philippine Army for his information and decision. Sir, also, let me clarify that these articles of war that you mentioned are actually grave offenses, and they actually merit separation from the service and other penalties. Magkaganon pa man po, I would like to state that the final form of the charges that may be filed against our personnel will still depend on the review of the investigation report that has been completed by my office to be approved by the Commanding General of the Philippine Army.
Yes,
so
sir.
I just would like to say that pending the approval of our investigation report, nothing is definite as of this time.
We understand, sir.
What
Pero,
is
sir,
the penalty for...
Sir, just to push that question a little bit further, do you mean ang maximum penalty from the court-martial would be separation from service lamang? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Among other things that may be decided upon by the General Court-Martial itself. It could also include, among others, imprisonment.
Okay.
Okay. But sir, linawin ko lang, I don't know if we're just speaking different languages between civilian courts and military courts. And as you said, baka may iba pang lumabas during the court-martial itself. Pero siguro ang diretsong tanong ng mga tao, may namatay eh. Ang pagkakalam namin, homicide, murder, and so on, is there a possibility of that still being covered at some point and becoming part of the formal charges? Or is that not part of the lingo here?
Yes, sir. Siguro, sir, dapat nating maliwanagan na ang amin po ay what you refer to as administrative investigation. The criminal aspect of the incident is now, I understand, being handled by the court in Davao City. The Philippine Army will be concentrating on the administrative liabilities of our personnel, depending on the evidence that may be adduced against them during the proper investigation and subsequent trial, if warranted.
I see. So dalawa pong tracks to. Merong court-martial and then that's without prejudice to a civilian court proceeding with with the trials as most Filipinos are familiar with, civilians are familiar with. Ganun.
Yes, sir. Kasi po, sir, as public officers, we are subject to the so-called threefold liability rule. Meron po kaming criminal liability, we also have civil liability, and we also have administrative liability. Now, sa amin po, sa Office of the Army Provost Marshal, we are concentrating on the possible administrative liability of any incident involving our personnel.
In the meantime, Colonel, nasa custody niyo sila General Durante and Colonel Licaco, di ba?
Yes, ma'am. They are, I believe, they are under custody of the Philippine Army. They are restricted to their quarters.
And usually, mabilis naman yung court-martial. Paano kapag halimbawa, na-dismiss nga sila, na-convict sa inyo, at na-dismiss, pero ongoing pa yung investigation sa civil court, regional trial court sa murder, saka yung mga civil, paano yun? Bahala na yung civilian court kung papapiansahin sila or what? Ganun na yun? Ita-turnover niyo ba sila?
Yes, ma'am. We already have several decisions by the Supreme Court regarding the matter. Pwede pong magkaroon ng parallel na proceedings ang court-martial and the civil courts. Ang isa pong issue dyan ngayon would be the jurisdiction. So kung sino po ang maunang makapag-file ng charges, then they will have primacy of jurisdiction. But of course, it has been announced already that the Philippine Army will defer to the wishes of the civilian courts.
Normally, gaano kabilis siya? Normally, nasabi ko na nga, mabilis yung mga court-martial ninyo Aabutin kaya ng mga 1 year?
Ma'am, ang court-martial po kasi, ma'am, that is equivalent to a criminal proceedings. So theoretically, the respondents or the accused will also have their own lawyers, and they can raise objections to some of the points being raised during the trial. So we cannot really, ma'am, say at this point how long it could possibly take for the trial to be completed.
Meron ba kayong equivalent, sir, nung reclusion perpetua, mga ganon, kung may imprisonment man? Because you earlier said that it's possible for them to get imprisoned, right?
Yes, ma'am. Ito po kasi nga reclusion perpetua are punishments that are prescribed under the revised penal code.
Yes. So may equivalent ba yun sa military?
Yes, and in the general court martial, we have punishments that may be rendered by the court subject to the approval or to the confirmation of the commanding general, the chief of staff, until it is approved by the commander-in-chief himself.
So what prevails pagka, kunyari, is it the criminal court, the civil court's decision, or is it the provost marshal or the court marshals?
Ma'am, pag ang decision po ng court martial, that will also be followed. And in the case, ma'am, decided by the Supreme Court has said na tapusin muna whatever it is that the General Court Martial may have imposed as a sanction, as approved, and afterwards, whatever sanctions, if at all, that may be imposed by the civil courts would follow.
Has it happened that the punishment in the civilian court is less harsh than the court martials, or vice versa? And if so, which one actually prevails?
Ma'am, as to the gravity...
punishment, or I just wonder.
Ma'am, as to the gravity of the sanctions that may be imposed, that would actually be a subject of the evidence that may be adduced during the trial. And then in the case of the court martial, the decision will have to be imposed by the General Court Martial after all this evidence have been presented, and then such decision will be recommended for approval by the Commander-in-Chief.
Paano kung reclusion perpetua sa civilian court, pero sa inyo hindi reclusion perpetua, just say 20 years? I mean, I just wonder which one will be followed. Do you give way to the decision of the civilian court, or is it the other way around?
Ma'am, as I said before, ma'am, we are only covering the administrative liability. That's why po ma'am itong reclusion perpetua are actually penalties that may be imposed in so far as the criminal charges are
So hindi kayo
concerned.
magpapakulong, sir? Hindi. Walang ganon.
It's possible ma'am depending on the decision of the General Court Martial and as approved by the Commander-in-Chief.
Colonel, nabanggit nyo na tapos na yung parang equivalent nyo ng preliminary probe, ano? May na-establish bang motive? Medyo malabo pa kasi.
Ma'am, as I said, ma'am, the results of the investigation report is still undergoing legal review by our Army Judge Advocate, precisely to be able to ensure that whatever findings and recommendations that may be stated there are actually legally in order. So it is still, ma'am, under legal review. Kaya, ma'am, I cannot yet divulge any details of the investigation report.
Sir, I'd like to address this question to both General Bronner and to Colonel Ramonte. Kasi sir, the people who are being charged, both administratively and criminally, Brigadier General Durante, Colonel Licyayo, and so on down the line, down to the gunmen who are also apparently active duty personnel. I know these are charges pa lang, and they still have to be proven, but so far it does seem really damning na you have people who apparently, at least on the surface, look like they committed a crime not for the furtherance of any mission, like for example counterinsurgency or against the rebellion or whatever, but for personal motives. In other words, what I'm saying is nagmumukhang, at least on the surface, nagmumukhang ipinag-utos ng isang mataas down the line ang isang mission na na criminal in nature at very, very personal. This does sound like a breakdown in the chain of command, a breakdown in the discipline in the armed forces. It really doesn't look very good, sir. How does the armed forces look at this? I know it's still innocent until proven guilty, pero when you look at all these elements falling into place, how does it look to you?
Well, Sir Ed, we believe that this is an isolated case, really, because hindi po ito yung sinumpaan namin when we took
Yes, sir.
our oath as members of the armed forces. In fact, we said that we are not going to follow illegal orders. No? Isa po yun sa mga phrases dun sa ating oath. So yun nangyari po, if proven that the gunman or the gunman and the other elements in the case, in the murder case, for instance, are proven that they followed an illegal order from their commanders, then they are equally liable. And sa amin po, we do not tolerate this wrongdoings ng ating mga personnel. That is why when I learned about this, that these two officers were being implicated in the case, I immediately ordered the relief of the brigade commander and the deputy brigade commander so that we could give way to a thorough and impartial investigation. Kaya po, inutusan ko sila to come to the headquarters of the Army right away so that we could get custody of them and restrict them to their quarters.
Sir, I have a follow-up to that, if you don't mind. I understand restriction to quarters lang yan. That is not equivalent at all to imprisonment or any other restriction maliban dun sa hindi kalalabas ng bahay. So in other words, they have access to, I suppose, tell me lang if I'm getting this right or wrong, they have access to cell phones, telecoms, internet, and they can receive visitors. Ganun ba? In other words, they're not in jail.
They are not in jail. Yes, because wala pa naman pong let's say warrant of arrest from the criminal courts or the civilian courts. On our case, sa armed forces naman, we are still in the process of finalizing the investigation, and then later on, once the charges have been reviewed by the judge advocate and it comes to me, and then I approve the commencement of the hearings by the General Court Martial, then that's the time that we can already commit them to a facility.
And the
In
censor,
the
sir,
meantime,
last
they
question, sir,
roam
if
free.
I may.
I mean, can they? I mean, they're treated as well, free men. I mean, they can. Is that how it? Kumbaga, walang. Kasi I mean, in companies there's preventive suspension, no. But effectively, wala silang magagawa within the confines of the company. In your case, what would be the equivalent of this? I mean, because they're not in prison, but they're roaming free, and they can do whatever they want to do.
Well,
Nothing
they're
is-
not really. But
Yeah.
they're not really roaming free because, as we mentioned, they're restricted in their quarters, and we have
quarters. Okay.
yes, and we have military police personnel guarding them in their quarters.
So it's an equivalent of a jail in a way.
not a jail, but they are
Yes.
restricted from moving around freely.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. But,
From-
sir, that's my concern nga, sir. I mean, and I suppose it's a legitimate concern by other people. They have the ability to communicate with other people in the meantime. Maliban dun sa hindi sila pwede lumabas ng bahay, pero they can go online, they can call up people. I suppose they can receive visitors. Aren't you concerned that they can still influence the people who were underneath them? I mean, you're talking about a general and a colonel, deputy brigade commander and a former PSC commander who may be able to, I'm not saying that they are, but who may be able to influence people pa rin, di ba? Wouldn't that be a concern?
Yes, that's part of the concern, Sir Ed. That's why we physically brought them here. But of course, we cannot also legally restrict them when it comes to communicating with other people. Hindi po yun parte ng ating restriction. But of course, doon po sa mga ibang involved, no, na mga personnel ng Philippine Army, they are detached from the officers physically.
Okay.
Colonel Remonte, kukulitin ko lang kayo, no, yung results nyo kahit ayaw nyo magbigay ng details. Kasi when this story broke, dami-daming story kumakalat dun sa Davao, na may mga involved pa daw na ibang matataas din na mga tao, higher ranking, well not higher, but higher ranking people. Yung findings nyo, are you recommending na may madagdag pa na medyo mataas nga na ranggong tao or prominent personalities to be indicted?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, as I said before, our recommendations, our findings are still undergoing review. So yun, ma'am, na aming Army Judge Advocate will still see through the finer points of our recommendations and our findings, just to ensure, ma'am, that everything would be in order. At once we recommend that and it is submitted for action by the Commanding General of the Philippine Army, then everything would be would have been properly the subject of study and review.
Kailan kaya lalabas yung approval ng Judge Advocate?
Ma'am, it has been undergoing review since mid last week, Valentine's Day. And I believe, ma'am, that in a few days it will be completed, after which it will go through the official channels before it reaches the office of our Commanding General.
Okay. Colonel and General, maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Salamat,
Thank you
General.
po. Maraming salamat.
That was
Thank you,
Army
ma'am.
Chief Lieutenant
Thank you.
General Romeo Bronner and Army Provost Marshal Colonel Randy Remonte. And that's all we have for the Chiefs. We hope it was discussed. We'll keep the conversation going. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
I'm Mami Paminto ng The Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.